violent crime is out of control in South Africa, and it has been for a very, very long time. The South African Police Service claims a 38% detection rate, which is the amount of crimes that are investigated and then referred to court for prosecution in the terms of murder and rape. The National Prosecuting Authority, in turn, claims a very admirable prosecution rate for rape and murder of between 80 and 83%, and that sounds very good. But for the 2022-2023 financial year, one discovers that, in fact, out of the total number of murders and trio crimes, which are robberies and hijackings, the NPA only prosecuted about 14%, which means that there has only been around 11% of successful convictions, far cry from the 80% that is claimed for successful prosecutions. And that is for murder and the trio crimes, or only for murder, but for the trio crimes, it's only 1.6%, which is dismal. So we at the Free Market Foundation have launched our Section 12 initiative, and joining me, Martin van Staden, Head of Policy at the Free Market Foundation, here to discuss one of the dimensions of this project is Zakhele Mthembu, our Policy Officer. Thanks for joining me, Zakes.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so let's get right into it. I think we as liberals and libertarians have long been convinced that the overcriminalization of conduct of society is one of the major reasons why the police aren't focused on what we think they should be focused on, and what I think most South Africans would agree they should be focused on, being our violent crime. So maybe run us through some of the reasons why overcriminalization is a problem.
Yeah. Thank you again for having me, Martin. As you said, libertarians who have already, always argued against the power of the state and the police, some libertarians will say are the only viable option for the use of force in society. I would agree that. I would agree to, if a state were to exist, then there should be an institution that is responsible for regulating violence among citizens, and the police is that. The problem, though, with decriminalization is, firstly, we find criminal action to be a problem, so violent action that is, harmful towards another person, or any form of action that is harmful towards another person or their property rights, that should be a crime. But with overcriminalization, is you then end up having actions that aren't violent to other individuals that are considered crimes. So from a premise of liberty, really, as libertarians or liberals in general, we don't want people having peaceful actions that do not harm anyone's rights to property or their life to be regulated, to attract criminal sanction. We don't want, someone who did not submit a form and not submitting that form, since it's a criminal action, sharing a cell with, a murderer or rapist. So, the most important aspect is the freedom aspect. And of course, there's the resources aspect. There's the common sense aspects of, if the police are focusing, as you just run down the numbers right there, right? If they are focusing on actions that aren't harmful to people, like, for instance, murder or rape or, a house burglary or business burglary would be, then the police are inherently using their resources on other things other than, those things that I deem to be important, right? And I think every South African will deem to be important because they harm other people, right? Instead of, trying to catch a potential rapist or murderer, the police will be catching someone who did not submit their form in time because they did violate a law that exists. So primarily decriminalization, as part of the Section 12 project, we want to, at the very least, encourage the deregulation, the decriminalization of South African society, not with the intent of, making crime less punishable, but with the intent of focusing the scope and resources of the police.
Yeah, because the police aren't idle. The thing with crime is that if a crime, whatever the nature of that crime is, you have to report it. And when you have reported it, the police have to assign an investigator to it. And that is precious time, as you said, that has to be focused on the major issues that really cause debilitating damage to our rights and our freedom and our property. But when the police spend all of their time going after what we would say is really peaceful and in many cases harmless, and in other cases civil matters that may be wrong but shouldn't be criminal, then they simply have less time for those important matters. And it's not just the police, as you've alluded to. The prosecutors. We have one prosecuting service in South Africa that caters to a population of 65 million. We have one singular institution, the NPA, and it is responsible for prosecuting the 86 reported murders a day, the 5 reported rapes every hour, which is far less than the true absolute number of rapes, I think we can just assume. And this institution has to be focused. I mean, it just speaks for itself. So, I mean, people would ask, so what, Martin and Zakes, what are the police focusing on that you think they shouldn't be? And from the top of my head, one can think of maintenance, the Maintenance Act. Everyone agrees that if you have a child, you have to contribute to the upbringing of that child and their welfare, and surely maintenance must be paid. But must it be a matter of criminal law? That's a question that I think makes things more complicated. Should the police be investigating those things when they could be investigating something else? Because not paying maintenance is ultimately peaceful. It's bad, but it's peaceful. There's other examples. Maybe you can run us through some of them?
Yeah. The maintenance example is actually pretty good because it shows at the very least an opportunity where something can be made into a civil, because it's primarily a civil matter, right? Society should not be involved whether two parties are deciding to maintain their child or not, unless one of the parties is incapacitated. Then maybe, depending on your social convictions, you will argue for something else. But yeah, another example would be, since I was working on, tobacco legislation, so I'm pretty familiar, firstly, with existing tobacco legislation, right? There is laws that bar, that regulate the hanging of signs by retailer who sells any tobacco products. And there are regulations that govern even the size of the image for the tobacco product that is being sold, which I find to be absurd because not complying with those regulations will create a criminal offense. So one can only imagine, as you said, the police spending their time chasing, a businessman who does not have the proper signage to indicate that they are selling cigarettes or they aren't, and that is wholly arbitrary. It's determined by the Department of Health, of course, to assuage them, really. So instead of spending time chasing someone like that, I think they could be spending time chasing a murderer, as you said, or a potential rapist. And much more heinous is in the tobacco bill that's in the pipeline, right? There are crimes or offenses where you could be put in jail for smoking in your own property. And if it comes down to a use of resources, I would rather have my taxes used to catch someone or prosecute someone who potentially could harm me, rather than someone who spends or whose actions are harming themselves at the most or aren't harming me at all.
Yeah, and then I think there's 2 more examples of kind of a more of a technical overcriminalization, where in the Minerals Act, it says that if you've been registered as a prospector or a miner and so on, you've gone through all the hoops, you're regulated and everything, but you forget to take that license that you've been granted and to lodge it with some other government office, that is a crime for which you can actually go to jail.
Oh, yeah.
So you're already regulated, you went through all the processes, you just forgot to lodge it with another government office. That's a crime. So that's a kind of a technical one. And then there's another one in the National Land Transport Act, which says that if you are a registered national land transport provider, you have a taxi or a bus service, you've done the training, you've done the qualifications, you have everything, but then you drive to Messina near the Zimbabwean border and you pick people up there and you take people there as well without also being registered with the cross-border authority, then you would have transported people to nearby an international border, and that's a crime if you're not registered. So you're regulated, you've done everything you needed to do, you're just not, that extra form was not submitted. That's a crime, you can go to jail. this is what police spend time investigating. This is what prosecutors spend time prosecuting, while South Africa has, again, 86 reported murders every single day, 5 reported rapes every single hour, and we have people the armed forces, the armed security services of our country focusing on nonsense like that. So, Zakes, why should ordinary people care? I mean, decriminalization is very much a particular ideological perspective that we hold very dear to our hearts. Why should other people who don't necessarily share those convictions also join us in saying, listen, let's decriminalize?
Yeah, I think, for the reasons you've mentioned, right? Like 86 murders, in a day, that's a lot. That's comparable to, a low scale war, a low intensity war. So I think people should care because everyone wants to be safe, right? Even if you don't believe that people should be free as a fundamental value, which is wrong, but it's okay. But even if you don't believe that people should be free, I think you'll believe that people should not be killed. They should not be stolen from. They should not have their businesses stolen from. They should not have their property vandalized and all those things. So this is really, it cuts across the board because the effects too, right, of violent crimes, I don't think there's a single person in South Africa who has not been affected or been a victim of, some form of violent crime or knows someone who has been that victim, whether you are in an urban area or in a rural area. Crime affects us all in different ways too. So a focus on violent crimes, I think, will benefit everyone. And most importantly, right, the effects of violent crime on the collective of South African society is that it depresses our economic prospects, right? I was seeing a video about why the Carlton Hotel closed down. And the main reason that it closed down is because the CBD just degenerated and the crime was way too high for any patron to want to go and spend the night there. And that is sad because it means that the people who were employed there are no longer employed there, and the people who were, the businesses that were reliant on there being foot traffic around the area, at the very least concerning the hotel itself, are no longer generating, those contracts that were being done due to that were being entered to due to the hotel being there are no longer entered to. So that is problematic. And of course, there's a larger scale, right? There is, normal South Africans who don't want to invest their money in South Africa. If you consider yourself to be a smart investor in South Africa, is particularly risky in comparison to, other countries of comparable economic standing who are just much more safer. So I think, given the economic effects and the fact that, everyone suffers from violent crimes, given the high rates that we have in South Africa, this is something that should cut across the board, irrespective of ideological lens. And any South African who has an interest in changing this should, support us.
Yeah, and I mean, you see that, you make the good example of the Carlton Hotel, but even around the same time that it closed was when all the big businesses, our biggest businesses in South Africa, moved out of Johannesburg CBD and even out of Pretoria CBD to surrounding areas like in Joburg, Sandton and Rosebank and so on, and in Pretoria to Menlyn and so on. Businesses just fleeing areas due to crime. Now, the reality is at some point, the crime in general gets so bad that the only place to flee to is out of the country. And we see that, I think a lot of people viewing this video know people who have immigrated. And at least from my personal anecdotal experience, the number one reason for that has always been crime. People in South Africa do not feel safe. And it is normal to not feel safe in South Africa. Whereas when you tell foreigners that, yeah, you just always kind of keep your wits about it, you're like, but you can't live like this. You cannot go through life like this every day feeling that you're in danger. But we have normalized it. And Zakes, the reason why we have started at the Free Market Foundation our Section 12 initiative is because we find it quite perverse, really, that violent crime has been normalized. We are in 2024 staring at the most important election, arguably, of a generation, and yet our most important issue, violent crime, is not being addressed, certainly not by government and the incumbent party, but also not by opposition leaders who are failing to put forward any innovative and creative, and dare I say, drastic solutions to this crisis. We at the Free Market Foundation are known for thinking outside of the box, and we have applied this to the violent crime problem. And we've put forward several proposals for how to really deal with violent crime in South Africa, and decriminalization is certainly foremost among them. So please, if you support our initiative, browse over to section12.org.za, click on Take Action, and click through the steps that we laid out there, which will allow you as an individual to send from your email address a pre-written letter to our security and justice ministers, our police minister, or to any opposition leader currently contesting the general election. And we want to put violent crime on the agenda for this election to make sure that whoever is in power, whether it remains the current government or a new coalition government or whatever formation does take the reins, understands that even beyond load shedding, even beyond the collapse of infrastructure, the number one issue that needs to be solved in South Africa are our totally out of control and unnatural, frankly, rates of violent crime. Please support us. Stay free. Thanks, Jakes.
Cool.